Hi, everybody. I'm here with John Vlastelica, and we're talking recruiter enablement. So, John, give us a quick introduction to you.
Sure. John Vlastelica here. I'm the CEO of Recruiting Toolbox, and we're a consulting and training firm. We do a lot of work helping companies define their hiring bar and then training up interviewers, hiring managers, recruiters, and TA leaders. Worked with about 350 clients across 30 countries, small but mighty teams. So companies like Nike and LinkedIn and Google and PepsiCo and Canva hire us. And spent about a third of my career as a corporate guy. So I was the head of TA for Expedia, and I led all of early Amazon tech recruiting and did a bunch of stuff there. So my team and I have a very strong kind of practitioner, no bullshit kind of approach to consulting and training, making sure it's not that high level useless stuff, but actually practical how-to kind of stuff that helps people win in their jobs. So that's me.
I mean, the key's in the name of the company, right? It's Recruiting Toolbox. It's not recruiting. I mean, you've all got the ability to do strategy. I've met some of your colleagues, but how to actually land it all, I think that's kind of like what people need
That's
from
the
you.
hard part. Yeah, lots of good ideas out there, but how do you execute and how do you scale and how do you drive adoption and get people to actually change behaviors? That's really hard to do for
Yeah.
sure. So, yeah.
Okay, so in a slight shift from the norm, I think after 110 people have given a definition of recruiter enablement, we've got enough now. And given you're one of the OGs of the whole like subject, let's get straight on to. In fact, what I want to ask you about is tell us about like your history with recruiter enablement because it goes back some time, and tell us about what you did like quite a while ago, and then let's talk about like the current state of play as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that any companies in the 90s and kind of early 2000s were great at recruiter enablement. I would say there were books, there were some big thick binders full of like policy and procedure stuff. There definitely was some onboarding, which was mostly just pairing up with someone and kind of learning by doing and screwing up a little bit. I do recall bringing some trainers in to some of my teams over the years, and having that realization that like you can't just take generic training and plug it into an Amazon, for example, and have it stick, have it make sense, because our process, our approach, the talent we're going after, just was diverse enough that it made it really hard to take a one size fits all training approach and apply it to recruiters. So obviously hiring warehouse workers is very different than hiring senior product and engineering people. Hiring executives is very different than hiring university, and hiring in a startup is very different than hiring at scale. And so over the years, what I found is that people basically took the binders, which were literally like this thick sometimes, like the how to open a rack, how to all the things, right? And they started to move it to like SharePoint sites or some intranet site that frankly was excuse me, just a bunch of documents. It wasn't really always a well thought out, like this is the best way to scale this up. And back in I'd say that the later 90s and early 2000s, talent acquisition teams were still relatively small compared to today. So there also wasn't this incredible pull to say let's have someone who, for example, is head of recruiter enablement, which is a function now. Like there's enablement teams within TA because we have teams that are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,000 people at some massive companies now, and of course you're going to have teams dedicated to onboarding and training and such. So I'm kind of excited that there's a bit of a focus of kind of put our own oxygen mask on first, not just train the business all the time, but think about how are we actually improving our craft and getting our own teams aligned and helping to onboard recruiters into our orgs. Does that make sense?
It does, very much so. It's not something I'd thought about a lot until really the last sort of year, to be honest. And having done hundreds of hours of research on this subject this year, I found that most companies are still doing very little in this area.
Yeah.
Some companies are giving them access to some learning opportunities. Some companies are giving them some very basic templating on things.
Yeah.
And then there is a small number of organizations who are doing things that are a bit more sophisticated. They've built dedicated sites and things like that. But I wonder what your current vision is. Like, what are most organizations that you come across? What are they doing well, and what are they lacking?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one of the biggest things that's missing is there's a missing underlying foundation of like, what is our company way of thinking about X? So you have tools and templates and training and process guides and all these things, and you could literally cover up the company logo and it could be, any company's whatever. It's typically quite generic. Now, the process when you get up to even 10,000 feet, certainly at 30,000 feet, looks almost identical at companies. There's variations, like I said, university is very different than executive, which is different than maybe tech or high volume retail, et cetera. But the basic process is the same. And that's usually what people get. There's some different approval process here. There's maybe a little different way we might use an interviewing tool or a scheduling tool or, something like that you have to learn. But a lot of companies, it's fairly similar. What I think is missing is, what's the company point of view? So for example, how should I be thinking about diversity when I'm sourcing? How should I be thinking about speed versus quality trade-offs when I've got a hiring manager who's feeling a lot of pressure? Am I empowered to push back? Am I empowered to redirect them to something else? Am I able to even set expectations for them, or are they just my customer and my job is just to please them? There's so much work that is happening and needs to happen around getting everyone kind of aligned on what our company point of view is. And companies like Uber and LinkedIn, for example, have hired us to help them define what we call hiring principles. And this is kind of our company way, the Uber way or the LinkedIn way of thinking about X, where X could be kind of who we hire, how we make hiring decisions, who owns what, what trade-offs we're willing to make and not make. And when I'm actually doing a panel next week with some CHROs at a CHRO event, and I was asking them about training and some of the challenges. And all three of the people on my panel who are quite experienced said, one of the big problems with training is it's just not very prescriptive. Like we kind of present things as optional best practices or just generic best practices, but we don't really say, like, this is the way we want you to do it. And if we do, we leave out the why, so we don't convince people to change their behaviors. We just say, like, starting Monday, everyone must blah, blah, blah. We've rolled out this new ATS, and good news, hiring managers, you have self-service now. You're on your own. You get to open your own rec and build your own job description. And here's the thing, but it's often received as optional to people. And so then you don't really have that company way of doing things, which means you have potentially wildly different candidate experiences, wildly different hiring manager experiences, wildly different recruiter experiences. And there should be some variation for sure, but if by design, there should be variation. If it's happening because of chaos, because there is no company defined way of doing something, I think that's a problem. So I think a lot of recruiter enablement and a lot of the tools and guides and process recommendations and strategy things, I think we need to get a lot more prescriptive, and it needs to be much more kind of based on some core principles that everyone agrees to. Does that make sense?
It does. I want to come back to the concept of hiring principles in a minute, but while you've said what you just said, I want to find out if I'm one of these like creative, slightly maverick type of recruiters. I've got this special sauce, right? And I've got the special way of doing things.
Yeah.
What you're talking about in terms of prescribing how to do it, that I might feel like I'm being like muzzled a little bit. How far should we go with giving people the ability to be creative in how they do things versus do it, paint by numbers, do this, then do this, then do this, then do this? Because I can see benefits in both things, but only one of them is really scalable. So what's your comments on that?
Yeah, so here's a framework I use when we're talking about rolling out anything. I use this kind of federal, state, local framework, okay? And there are some things you want federal level globally. Like we work with companies that have hundreds of thousands of employees, and it's like whether you're in Singapore, whether you're in South Africa, whether you're in the US, whether you're in Colombia, like this is the company point of view on this thing. And usually the things they have really strong points of view on have to do with candidate experience, diversity, leveraging certain competencies to define what we used to call culture fit, getting specific, like this is the company way of doing this or thinking about this, and we don't want variation. I've seen some HR teams treat everything like it's federal, right? Like this is the policy manual. Everyone will do this global, and it's so not localized. It so doesn't capture some of the differentiators that make some recruiters better and others not, or some hiring teams that have maybe a best practice that they use. That you don't want to take some of that away if it's in service to speed, quality, diversity, cost. Like if you're optimizing for speed over quality in one group, you might have a different process. You might not have a 6-person interview team and a 3-week-long interview process. If you're optimized for speed, you might make same-day hiring decisions with a 3-person team. And I want to be smart that as recruiters, we're being talent advisors and we're not just pushing a federal point of view on everything. So what we do with companies is when we talk about hiring principles, we're talking mostly about federal. Sometimes we do some state level stuff. So engineering does it a little different. High volume does it a little different, executive does it different. And then local are the things where as a TA leader, for example, when I was the head of TA at Expedia, I said, like, these are the things I want you, the recruiter, and you, the hiring manager, to figure out on your own. I don't think we should have a company-wide point of view. This should be localized based on what you know about the rec, what you know about the market, what you know about the hiring manager. That's a very mature way of thinking, though, because traditional HR is federal everything, roll it out. Why aren't you using the form, right? Can I tell you a quick story? I know we're tight on time. Can I tell you a quick story? So we're working with a company that you would have heard of, and it's got about 1,500 locations, okay? And it's kind of in the higher volume hiring space. And this company brought in some IO psychologists to build interview guides. And they built these interview guides kind of in a classic ivory tower way without engaging much of the people on the ground who'd be using them. And they created 13-page required interview guides for people that were hiring right out of school, low-level hourly workers. Like the workers were either going to work at McDonald's or this company. Like it was that kind of salary range. 13-page interview guides with full tell me about a time detail, required rubrics that you had to do, all this stuff. And we came in after this happened and we're talking to people in the field and they're like, we don't use any of that. Only if we have to, only if some recruiter says, I will not process your offer if you don't send me this form. And then we just basically, copy paste a bunch of crap in there just to kind of get it filled out as quickly as possible because we have a business to run. And this is ridiculous. Now, is it legally good? Like, yes, like whoever built it wanted to make sure they ticked all the boxes. They wanted, like, in service to consistency and legal stuff, they built something out, but it was so over the top for what was actually needed in the real world. And that's what I see too much of in that spirit, kind of over engineering it, making it required, pushing it out to people without doing the work and not localizing. Does that make sense as well?
Certainly does. I mean, I think the common sense in this is if everybody wants to work for you, then you can, and if everybody wants to work for you and you've got a very, very big choice of who to hire, then that level of, rigor around the process is probably the right thing to do. But if the person's going to be working at McDonald's or working in your operation, I think that they're going to work for McDonald's if the McDonald's process is a bit easier. So you're putting yourself in a considerable competitive disadvantage by doing that. Which brings me on to the concept of hiring principles in general. Who needs to be involved in creating the hiring principles if they are at like federal level? Because I can imagine the CFO making a decision about we're going to spend a lot on hiring or we're not going to spend a lot on hiring. And I can imagine the chief digital officer having input around we're going to make this a very automated and slick experience, or we're going to do something different. I imagine there's quite a lot of stakeholders could be involved in this because it's so vital to the company's ability to thrive.
Yeah. It's quite a collaborative effort. So it's kind of funny when potential customers are talking to us about this kind of work. I always say, like, hey, by the way, this is going to probably require you, VP of Talent Acquisition, 20 or 30 hours of your time as part of this, because you're going to be socializing, you're going to be talking to your team. We're also going to be doing focus groups that you can participate in, but we're going to want to talk to your most influential senior leaders. We're going to talk to the DEI team. We're going to obviously talk to the recruiting team, the HR business partners. The successful hiring principle document sort of has virtual thumbprints from key people across the organization. You can't just write them down in a room. And I mean, I could write hiring principles in an hour for a company. But it's the process of getting them built. It's the engagement and socialization and buy-in along the way, and the customizing the language and the alignment work internally so that they can be federal. That's really the most important part, is not just writing down a bunch of things of how we'd stack rank speed, quality, diversity, but to actually make sure that aligns and it's not so aspirational that existing hiring managers look at it and go, what is this bullshit? Like, we don't do any of this, you know? So, but it should also be directionally pointed to where you want to go. So it has to capture some of the current state. Like, this is kind of our way of thinking about this. And then it also has to be pointed to kind of the company we want to be, the aspiration of creating a consistent, you know, white glove candidate experience. Like, we're probably not doing that today, but we want everyone that comes through, if we're a big consumer brand, to feel like they had an experience that's worthy of a brand like ours. Like, that's an example thing that might be at a principle level. And then in the detail pages that follow the core principles that fit on one page, then you talk about the kind of why we think this, and then how would we actually do it. Like, this is the mechanism to kind of drive this. So for me, I was lucky when I worked at early Amazon, even though we didn't call it hiring principles, and even though I was, you know, I was young, like I didn't know some of this stuff, you know, but we did have kind of a company point of view on a lot of things. And some were written down, some were just kind of unspoken, but everyone knew. And then we developed some mechanisms like the Bar Raiser program and some other things to help actually drive adoption of kind of our company way of thinking about it. So when new hiring managers, new interviewers, new recruiters came on board, there was kind of an Amazon way, even though it wasn't called hiring principles and broken out the way that I do it now we do it now for clients. So yeah, I think there's big, like it's a lot of work. And to me, it's one of the most strategic things you can do as a TA leader is kind of build out the kind of current state, the aspirational state, socialize it, and get everyone bought into kind of the who we hire and how we hire stuff. And that's really defining your hiring bar. It's your hiring bar isn't just a list of what makes a quote A player at our company or top talent. You have to have mechanisms. So it's not just the who you hire, it's the how you hire becomes part of your hiring bar as well. And that's a really big miss in a lot of companies is they think process is just this like tick the box, you know, like a guide you follow, but actually the mechanisms you put in place to kind of define the bar and drive accountability around the bar, that's really what's missing in a lot of organizations, which goes back to recruiter enablement, right? Which is our process shouldn't just be seen as this boring tick the box, 30,000 feet, it looks the same at every company. It should really be this thing that is somewhat not unique, but somewhat leverages things that are specific to our hiring principles, to our goals around kind of who we want to hire and how we want to hire.
Yeah, I think this whole topic is hiring principles. It's like there's not many things in an organization that are more important. It's up there close to what type of financial profile do we want. It's up there close to what type of products and services do we want to offer. It's it's real strategic stuff, I think. Yeah. What are the like, if there was one thing that you would recommend to companies that they're probably not doing today when it comes to recruiter enablement, what would that be?
You know, I think there's a big opportunity to live the recruiter as talent advisor kind of orientation a lot of companies have. And so I think one of the things that's often missing from a lot of recruiter enablement is really empowering recruiters to show up as strategic partners, as peers in that type of relationship, as peers in that moment, whether the hiring manager is a VP or a lead on a team. I want recruiters to be seen as talent advisors and deliver talent advising kind of value. And I don't think that that's captured in a lot of recruiter enablement. I think there's a lot of policy and process and guides and tools and whatever. And I don't think there's an underlying, we'll go back to principle. I don't think there's an underlying principle that says, hey, the hiring manager is not your customer. Your job is not to please them. Therefore, when we send out surveys when a rec is closed, we're not going to ask the hiring manager if they were happy with the service you provided today. I don't want you in that, would you like fries with that kind of orientation when you're engaging with a manager. I want you to show up differently. And that's an area, going back to being prescriptive, I don't think a lot of recruiter enablement has that common thread across the process. I think too often, you know, we call it an intake meeting. Like, I'm there to ask you questions and write down what you say and then go do what you ask me to do, versus showing up in more of a strategy kickoff meeting and really bringing data and insights and recommendations and pushing back on unrealistic leaders. And, you know, seeing the company as my customer, not you, the hiring manager, as my customer, means I might need to kind of, recommend some changes and even push for some changes. So I think that's probably a big opportunity area for most TA teams.
Wonderful. Well, John, I don't know your exact price like rate card, but I think you get paid quite a lot of money for doing this, talking about this type of stuff and helping companies with this. So I won't abuse it. And I want to thank you very much for taking the time to join me today. It's been as every time I talk to you, it's been really useful and fascinating, and thank you very much.
Adam, thank you for the opportunity. Great to chat.